Hello everyone, hope you find yourself having a great day. We've got another Cinema 4D tutorial that we're going to get underway. It has to do with using connectors, and we're going to create a scene that has pendulums swinging from an upper support in a way that they produce a really neat looking waveform pattern. I put together a video a few days ago, and well, I'll let you look at it and see what we're going to recreate. And you can see as these pendulums swing, they produce a really neat visual in the sense that they get out of sync in a way that they produce this nice little waveform effect. So let's get underway and we'll get this project started. So let's fire up Cinema 4D, and we're going to use three basic primitives. We're going to use 2 cylinders and a cone. So let's create ourselves a cylinder. This is going to be used for our upper support. So we're going to reduce that in its size a little bit, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees on its side. Now let's move that up so that it's out of our way a touch. Next, we're going to create another cylinder, and this is going to be used for our wire that supports our pendulum. It's going to be significantly smaller, so let's narrow it down so that it's about the size of a wire, and we're going to make it a little bit longer so that we've got some distance where those pendulums can swing. Okay, so there's that. We're going to go into our primitives again and grab ourselves a cone, and we're going to zoom in on that cone and we're going to stretch it up tall, and then we're going to modify its caps so that we can have a nice pendulum. So under its caps, we're going to enable top and bottom, and it gives you some control points where you can manipulate to give some roundness to your pendulum, give it a much more pleasing visual. Alright, so that looks pretty good. We're going to rotate that guy 180 degrees, and he's flipped over now. So I need to reduce it in its size. So grab your scale tool and let's scale this guy down, and that looks pretty good. We just want things scaled in relation to one another so that we don't have this really monstrous pendulum connected to this little wire. So we can move the guy down. We're going to move it down so that it's just connected to this wire, and it just needs to be in there just a little bit, and that should be good. So now we've got our upper support. Let's name that support. We've got our pendulum, and we've got our wire. Alright, so we need to connect our pendulum and our wire together so that it's all one object, so that when it moves and when it's handled and when it receives dynamics, it behaves as one unit. So select your pendulum, control click, select your wire. While they're selected, right click, choose make editable, and again while they're selected, right click and choose connect and delete. So now we've got one object, a pendulum. We need it to swing from the top, not from the bottom. So what we need to do is modify its axis by enabling the axis modification tool. While that's enabled, we're going to move our axis up. We want it to be at the very top of that. Not only do we want it to be at the top, but we want it to be at the center of our support. So let's go into our front view, and we're going to take our pendulum, disable our modification tool, axis modification tool, and we're going to take this pendulum and we're going to move it down. Make sure we got it selected. We're going to move it down so that it is dead center of our support. Let's zoom in and we'll get a look at that. It needs to be dead center or we'll swing off center. So that looks pretty good. Make sure, zoom in a little bit more, make sure. Being centered is going to help here, or else your pendulums are going to get wobbly on you. Okay, back out to, actually we can stay in front view. Let me go back into that. Now we're going to enable our modification of our axis here. We're going to move it so that it's dead centered also. Alrighty. So we're looking good there. Back out to perspective view. And let's take a look at it from this point of view. You can see that our pendulum is centered up in our upper support rod. Okay, so now one thing we want to do is we need to create a connector. So under Simulate Dynamics Connector, we'll insert a connector into our scene. And let's think of our connector in this way. Let's think of a door and a door frame. We've got the door frame, which is stable, and we've got the door, which is movable. Think of this large piece of the connector as what's going to be connected to the door frame, the piece that doesn't move. Think of the small piece as a piece connected to the door, the piece that's going to move. Again, we need to move this up so that it's centered on our upper support. So let's move it up. Let's go into our front view again, and we'll zoom in on this guy. And we're going to move it up, the connector up, not its axis point, but the connector, so that it's centered to our upper support. There we go. So we're looking good there. When we step back out to perspective view. Now you'll see our connector is positioned centered on our upper support. Alright, so with our connector selected, we need to place in object A. We've got object A and object B. We need to place in object A the piece that's going to remain stable and unaffected by motion. And that's going to be the support. So we're going to put our support in object A, and our pendulum is going to move, and so we want that to be object B. Okay. Now, nothing's going to move at this point until we assign some dynamics tags to this. So, again, we want the support to be stationary, but it needs a dynamics tag. So right-click it, choose Simulation Tags, and we're going to give it the collider body tag. The collider body is going to let things interact, but it's going to remain stationary. It's not going to move. So assign the collider body tag to that. Our pendulum, we want to move, so we're going to assign it a dynamic tag by right-clicking, Simulation Tags, and we're going to give it the rigid body tag. That's going to allow it to move, but still interact with things, unlike the collider body, which will only allow things to interact with it while it won't move. It'll stay stationary. Okay, so we've got our connector, we've got our pendulum, and we've got our support. Now, let me zoom back. I'm going to increase our timeline here to about 1,000 frames. And we're going to take our pendulum, and remember to disable your axis modification tool, or you'll just rotate your axis. You won't rotate your actual pendulum. So if I take and rotate this pendulum, you'll see that it rotates just as we intended from its top position. So we're going to want to create a series of these, but we don't want to have to redo every step that we've done. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a null and go to your objects there and create a null and select all of your objects and drag them and release them inside your null. So now in a sense, we've got all of our primitives we've created and all the dynamics we've assigned to them contained in one null that now we can duplicate rather than have to recreate all of them. So let's go to our top view, and while we've got our null selected, let's take and press Control C and then Control V, and we're going to move the copy that we've just created. We're going to create several of these. We don't want them to touch. Don't want these objects to touch each other, or else friction will have an effect on how these pendulums swing. So let's get them where they're just apart from each other, and we're going to duplicate these by control clicking Control C and V. All right, control clicking, Control C, Control V, duplicate again, Control C, Control V, and that might be plenty. Let me zoom in and make sure they're not touching. Okay, everything's good. We've got a dozen or so pendulums here. Alright, so we've got all of our pendulums. If we hit play, nothing's going to happen because at this point they're just hanging static. There's no gravity affecting them. They're in a sense locked down. Rewind my timeline, and we're going to select all of these nulls. But what we need to do here is we need to rotate their center of axis point. So with our axis selection tool selected, or modification tool selected, we're going to go into our front view again, and we're going to modify that and move those up to the center. And it needs to be dead center again. There we go. Back out to a perspective view. And let me show you something here. If we take these nulls and rotate them, and just disable our modification tool, what you're going to see is the upper support itself is even going to rotate. And that's not what we want. So let's undo that. Let's go to our expand out each one of these. And let's take a little bit of time to do this. Kind of necessary because we want to get everything positioned in a way that's going to, we can offset these and have them perform that neat little waveform effect. Okay, so we've got all these. We're going to take our pendulum and control click each pendulum. March down through our list here. Make sure that we're only getting our pendulums. Alright, bear with me here. Make sure we got them all. Alright, we're getting there. Looks like I missed one somewhere. There we go. Okay, so we're going to take and rotate these. Make sure you're rewound in your timeline, completely rewound. And we're going to rotate these guys up above the halfway point, up somewhere about like that. Okay. Now we're going to take and put a cube in here. We're going to stretch this guy out so that it's longer than our width of all of our pendulums combined. And move it over just a touch. All right. And we're going to move it up under here. And we're going to move it up just a little bit. We can narrow that down a little bit. Doesn't need to be quite so big. And move it up just a touch more. We want that cube to be in a way that it's beneath the wires, not the pendulums. Okay, we need to assign that cube a simulation tag. Except before we do that, let's take and rotate this cube just a touch. Just a touch. A little bit goes a long ways here. Okay, we're not touching our wires, so that's good. Okay, so let's assign a simulation tag to that by right-clicking the cube, simulation tag, and we're going to give it a collider body tag. All right, so we've got that in a nice position, and if we hit play, you'll see that all of our pendulums fell and rested on that cube that we created, but they're offset a little bit. So we go back into each of our pendulums, right, and we're going to tell each of these of the dynamics tag to set that as its initial state. So mark your way down by selecting each of your dynamics tags for the pendulum, and we're going to tell each one set initial state. Set initial state. And this is going to tell it when our animation starts that this is where we want these pendulums to begin instead of their uppermost position. Make sure you get each one. And we'll keep going down, setting this initial state. We're getting there. About got it now, guys. Okay, so at this point, if we hit rewind, these pendulums are going to stay where we put them because we've set their initial state. Now, this cube that we use to facilitate the positioning of those pendulums, we no longer need, so we delete that. So you'll see that we've got everything, all of our pendulums set up in a way that they're symmetrical but offset to some degree. So if I zoom back a little bit and hit play, you'll see all the pendulums swing in a nice way that over time they begin to get out of sync with each other. Because some began at a higher point, they have more velocity. Others began at a lower point and they have less velocity. You'll see that this articulation will get more and more perverted the longer we go. But we're swinging, these pendulums are moving slowly. They're almost as if they're in a dense environment. So let's go to edit our project settings. And under dynamics, we need to increase our time scale to about 300. And then that may need to go up or down depending on the length of the wires that you created for your scene. So let's rewind it and give it a play. You'll see now they're swinging much more like that you might expect them in the real world. So I'll rewind. We'll get us a good point of view where we can see this. Let's hit play and see what happens. And you can see that they're all swinging. They're getting out of sync already. And over time, that's going to give us a really neat looking articulating waveform pattern. And there it goes. It's starting to get really interesting already. And that whole pattern takes on a whole different point of view depending on where you're looking at it from. And you know, you can texture these out any way you want. But just remember, there's some very basic things that you need to do. You need to give consideration to your time scale. If I were to increase that to about 500, let me rewind that. You'll see they swing. They just really swing fast and fast and fast. You can even keyframe that time scale so that it begins fast, right, and then drop it back down to about 0, for example. Put your camera move in there, and it'll look like you've frozen time. The camera will move. It's almost like the Matrix effect, where something's moving, and then it just locks, and then the camera moves around it, and then it picks back up to where its speed and frame rate is what it was in the beginning. So, hope this helps you guys. I hope you found it interesting, and if you put any together, make a comment, post a link to it. I'd love to see what you've created. So, hope if you find this video interesting and like to see more, please remember to subscribe. And if you liked it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. So, talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.